Crikey.
And
Very
it's
well.
now live, and it's going to pick up whoever's talking. So you need to shut it now, Paul. Welcome. It's the fourth BoS Speaker Hangout of the year, and today we've got Jeff Szczepanski from Stack Exchange, one of the fastest growing. Well, it's easily the best and the best recognised Q&A site for software people. I think you're running out of developers to answer questions for these days, so, but constantly growing. And we've also got a BoS old timer, a serial speaker, Mr. Paul Kenny. So, Jeff, what you do now is say hi, and then the screen will flick to you.
Okay. Hey, hello everybody. Yeah, once again, Jeff Szczepanski here with Stack Exchange, Chief Operating Officer, and responsible really for the business revenue half side of Stack Overflow and the rest of the Stack Exchange network. And Mr. Kenny there, I'll let him introduce himself as well.
Okay, hello everybody. For those of you who I may not have run into in one of my 7 or 8 appearances at Business of Software, I'm the guy that Mark drags in to talk about sales, or one of the guys, Jeff being the other, and I have, I guess I help businesses get their sales story right and communicate it effectively to the world out there. And I try and help developers feel a little bit more comfortable with themselves when they have to sell.
Excellent. And before we kind of go into some questions and talk to Jeff about sales and applying agile to sales, I just wanted to have a big shout out to another business software friend, Kathy Sierra, who's just brought out Badass Making Users Awesome, which is a very good book. Not like most business books where you get 20 pages that you have to read and then you have another 380 pages of just kind of regurgitating the same material. This gets really, really more and more dense as you go all the way through it. It's not filled with words, lots of pictures, lots of stuff to do, but it's been based really on 2 business software talks that she's done over in Boston in the last few years, and she has a fabulous shout out to business software and the business software community for forcing her into doing it. So we're going to go over to Jeff. Jeff, can you just tell us a little bit about what your talk was about for anyone that hasn't seen it, and for people that have? Just tell them a little bit about what were you thinking?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, I think the core premise of the whole thing is about applying agile, classically software development process around agile to basically managing and scaling sales teams. And the essence of the talk was really assuming a largely technical audience or people with technical background, and really trying to talk about taking the scariness, if you will, about an entrepreneur maybe, or a small business owner or scaling business owner that has a technical background but is a little bit scared of the sales side of things and sees it as this foreign thing that they don't really understand or know how to manage. And I think really the core premise in my thinking behind it in the talk itself was that actually that the sales, I think a modern sales team in the way it's built has very similar management properties to the way a good scalable software team is run, essentially. And that this idea that what makes successful software teams and the way you stabilize software development is to build a set of separable skills in the various team members. It's basically the end-to-end process of doing software development. And I actually see sales having a very similar thing, where a modern sales process is really about an end-to-end relationship with the customer, and that you're really trying to manage for these performance characteristics and skills within each individual on the team end-to-end in a very similar manner to what you would need to do in the software development side of things.
Cool. Paul, I thought sales was about mind control. That's what you've been
Manipulation and mind control.
Yes, it is all about mind control, but it's not about controlling the customer's mind. Usually for entrepreneurs, it's about controlling their own mind, which I guess was the theme of my talk, which was to look beyond the shiny new toys in sales. Every sales blog you open, every every time you click on one of the business channels on YouTube, you will find somebody there with a shiny new toy, whether it be a challenger sale, a key account sale, whatever, major account sale, strategic sale. The list goes on. And I guess the theme of my talk that day was to look beyond the labels and work out what your team actually needs. And I found myself, when Jeff was up the day before me, nodding furiously throughout his presentation, because that whole agile approach says respond to what you see in front of you rather than what the latest guru says.
Yeah, some of the parallels there are probably no accident after seeing several years of your talks and stealing and reapplying some of the really good stuff you talked about.
Good. So Jeff, what do you mean by applying agile to sales? Because I mean, clearly agile means a particular kind of set of a mindset and a series of things for a developer. Is that going to scare salespeople? Is it something that's sort of alien to them? How are you kind of selling that in as a concept to them?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. I mean, that's one of the things that we actually struggled with when we started applying this in the early days, was just, the terminology and just the familiarity with the entire process is something you sort of take for granted, where software developers over the last, many years now, it's become sort of common practice and well understood within software developers, but it is kind of a foreign development to do it very, foreign thing to take that very literally and bring it over into sales. The interesting thing there, though, is that in a lot of ways, I think some of the agile techniques, when you think of, the burn down chart, where you're burning down, towards particular goals in software, that the software development things, when you're deploying features or developing features, it's actually very difficult, or it's harder to really have a direct, or high confidence level in basically how complete is something. Is this feature 50% done, or is it 75% done? There's more things ahead of you. When you start thinking about agile and burn downs in the context of sales, teams have typically, in whatever their forecasting horizon is, a month or a quarterly goal, that's a very concrete number. And thinking of the burn down process and the momentum and cadence of the team towards the goals is actually much easier to measure in the sales examples, right? So I think, on the one hand, while a lot of the terminology was to the salespeople, to your original question there, people could immediately start to see some of the value in starting to think about how they're moving through the month and how their pipeline state currently looks relative to how they're burning down relative to their forecast for the month. And so, I think, and two, maybe taking a step back to and kind of tying it together to your earlier question around, just what are we really doing here, or maybe laying a little bit more foundation or the justification why I think this actually works so well, is that, I think a lot of times, especially if you're like a technical person or not maybe as savvy in sales, you look at sales from the outside and you kind of see like, oh, this is there's a standard pitch that people are reading from. There's a bunch of selling points. There's this like highly repetitive process going on that's sort of cookie cuttered into each one of the different relationships that you're going to be building with various customers. And I think while there's certainly a lot of common threads amongst those things when you're doing selling, part of the essence of doing good sales is actually customizing that conversation specifically based on your product knowledge and sales techniques to that particular situation. And what's funny, when you take a step back and look at software, I mean, a lot of times people talk about software development as this highly creative process, that this has never been done. And that's sort of true, but I think that uniqueness actually has a direct parallel to the uniqueness of every sales conversation. And in software, one of the reasons it's such a powerful thing, the whole Mark Andreessen software's eating the world, is that the reuse level is actually extremely high in software development. You're not building the compiler or designing a language over again for every project. There's very well-known design patterns. Every software project really is about customizing a bunch of, resources specific to a particular application, and that that parallel there to sales again is extremely strong, where essentially you're doing exactly the same thing in sales. And that I really look at that as sort of the, if you will, sort of academic or theoretical foundation of actually why it's not so surprising that all the different things you might do of thinking of building and scaling a modern sales or software development team can be directly applied as a management process to selling.
Interesting.
Absolutely. I ought to add here that the whole idea of the burn down chart anybody who's been who's come up through a traditional sales route will be used to a big chart on the wall, which in more recent times has been automated or digitized in some way. But I think the burn down chart has a very specific advantage to anybody who's running a sales team, and it goes beyond everybody knowing where they are. What it does is it holds salespeople accountable for their own forecast. It allows when we recruit salespeople, particularly experienced ones, one of the things that we try and get to is not whether they hit their targets or not, because everybody in an interview always tells you that they regularly hit their targets. It's more a question of I always ask them how they forecast for their business, because that tells me more about what they know about their market. And sometimes I care less whether they hit or miss their targets, but I care less about where they were on their own forecast, because that tells you a lot more about how the level of engagement with their marketplace, and also whether they've got the chops to take responsibility for what's happening in their marketplace. And so while it's always great to absolutely smash a target, and nobody ever complains because the revenue's great, I always say to sales directors, you should be as worried if you go way over target, because you've got a whole bunch of revenue that nobody knew was there or was coming in. And the whole idea of a burn down for me, and I will fully put my hand up and admit I've stolen the terminology from Jeff and the guys at Stack Overflow for other clients, is that it starts a really good conversation about who really are our prospects, how well we know the market, and it gets people to, I guess, back their bet on what's out there. And if anybody hasn't gone back and had a look at the examples that Jeff gave at Business Software Europe back in June, I would very much start there. It's immediately applicable to every sales team.
Yeah, great. So question coming in here, which depends which side of the building you sit on here, whether you're on developing developers or sales. Developers offended that you talk about agile sales, and I guess that's really around salespeople. Is that around sort of salespeople fooling themselves that they're a bit more techy and a bit more savvy than yeah, they were, or I mean, and have you found it within Stack Exchange that having a common language, has that helped, or do you now have two different dialects that people speak?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I can't say that I've seen the developers be offended. I think there's some element to the fact that, like, as we tried to, we were scaling the team beyond, dozens into the, 50, 100 people, we started getting more formal about the terminology and stuff that we were using in the sales version of Agile, and we ended up shedding some of the original history that it was well known to software developers, just because it created too much context without real need to know, essentially, for people in the sales team. So there's this element that I think what's funny is I think a lot of people in the sales team don't necessarily realize, especially the newer people, that we're actually applying something that actually was stolen from the software development world. It's really more just the Stack Overflow sales process from their point of view. And we of course mention it in training and talk about some of the foundation there, but it doesn't. It's not really core day to day. I mean, I think the most interesting impact of it has been, especially in a business. Stack Overflow, very programmer-centric. A lot of the people on the management team are all software developers by background. We're clearly sort of product-driven people here, and technology-driven people that, the fact that the discussion and some of this stuff carries over, it kind of gets back to the original point of my talk, that it's actually helped the software developers appreciate what the salespeople do more and actually get some insight into what's really going on. I think, it's either sort of this scary foreign thing or a black box kind of things that people didn't understand, and the fact that they can see one of our stand-ups on the sales team running, and they think of the agile stand-ups that are going on and the burn down charts and the retrospectives and all that kind of stuff. I use a little bit different terminology on the sales team, but the fact that they see all that going on actually makes them appreciate the fact that what the salespeople are doing isn't really all that different than what they're doing. Obviously, the tools of the trade are completely different, and it's about conversations and product knowledge and stuff rather than technical knowledge. But the parallels are there, and I think it's actually helped build respect amongst the development team of what the salespeople actually really do every day. And in a sense, it's even why they get compensated well. When you have a really good salesperson and they're making a ton of money, I think maybe people that are more naive to what's going on in sales don't really appreciate that, but it's kind of like, you ask them, well, would you really want to do this job? Do you want to pick up the phone 50 times or 100 times a day trying to break into these different places, having these conversations and applying what they know in these very creative ways? I think for me, the core of it is really, it really does help actually connect the two halves of the organization and make it less of an us and them and, Mars and Venus or whatever metaphor you want to use there.
Excellent.
I have to say, Mark, if a developer was to feel offended by the fact that salespeople are trying to create some kind of process, if you like, and use similar terminology if it helps, I would have to say, count to 10, take a deep breath, and get over yourself. Because nobody's out to steal your lunch. Nobody's pretending to be a developer. Right. And I think software developers appreciate more than anybody that what you do when it comes to managing process is that you go and you steal all the stuff that works and you test it and you see what works, and if it works you keep it, and if it doesn't you eject it. Because a lot of the whole agile philosophy comes from, you can trace a lot of it back to, traditional project management techniques, whatever. So I think if anybody feels offended, I'm a little bit sorry, but not that much sorry, really. Get over yourself and work with it. Sorry, if that was too blunt, I apologize.
No, sometimes you've just got to be blunt, Paul. Sometimes you've just got to be blunt. Paul, hang on, here we are. Agile's not necessarily native. Oh, this is Dimitar. Hi, Dimitar. This is one of your crack sales team over in London, I think, isn't it? Agile's not necessarily native to software development. It was adapted from. Ah, right. Okay. So no, he's defending the right of software.
That's right.
He's defending the right of his boss to do exactly what the hell he wants in any environment whatsoever. Has he got a review coming up?
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a good point that Dimitar makes. It's kind of like, the software developer should remember that. Paul essentially made this point, which is that a lot of the best stuff is usually stolen from somebody else and then slightly improved or adapted to the specific circumstances.
Yeah. So how do you find this works with? You've got teams in how many locations now, Jeff?
We have 3 teams between our Denver, Colorado office here in the States, New York City, and then the London office where Dimitar actually resides there.
And are they all using the same system, the same process?
Yeah, you'll see that
come in with different.
We've tried to keep, it's been evolving, and each team really is doing, the craft in slightly different ways, but we really spend quite a bit of energy making sure that we're surfacing best practices, and Dimitar in particular, actually, give him the majority of the credit actually of the day-to-day. Working with the teams and really helping evolve the literal application of the agile stuff to sales. And in fact, it's Dimitar who actually was the first one to make the connection and actually literally start to steal the agile concept and apply it directly to sales. My side of it was coming from this idea just of seeing the parallels in the management processes, but hadn't made the leap at the time to say, like, wow, like you could literally start taking this stuff and do stand-ups, let's do retrospectives. It's not just these things are similar, we can actually just directly use the same management techniques. And so Dimitar in particular, and then the other teams, they, as we started deploying some of these concepts and getting people to buy into it, building our own terminology and stuff around this, it continued to evolve. And so again, we work as much as we can to as each team lead or whatever comes up with some additional nuance and insights into what works, what doesn't work, what the conversation should really be about, how do you spend the time within the stand-ups and make sure that people feel like they're getting value and not just wasting their time or doing status updates. What is it that, not only from a process standpoint, but even just from a core selling standpoint, what things do we do? How do we surface, the best practices around each one of the sales conversations and what's really, what's going on with the product, what's going on with the pitches, what's going on in the market, all of these things. have just continually been refined there.
Cool. Okay. Sean Anderson is coming in here with something else, which is not directly related to this, but this is something that comes up time and time again in any conversation we have with software people, and particularly now, so many more companies are focused on a SaaS type business model where the kind of ticket prices are lower. So Sean's it seems common understanding that high price software, well, you might call it good value software, requires a sales team. How about low cost software, say $500 a year? Should that type of company just focus on marketing, or is a sales team needed?
Okay, I can start this if you like.
Sure.
I think it's got less to do with the value of the software and more to do with what you want the salesperson to do. If I have defended some very well-paid salespeople's compensation, etc., because they have been people who have found the lead in the first place, established the contact, which can take a great deal of time, and there's a certain art to being able to kick down doors, particularly in large corporations, and build a relationship, and sometimes not see any value from that for 2 or 3 years, waiting for some cycle of software investment to come round until they get a formal chance to pitch. And if you do all of that sort of stuff, then I think that's the high price stuff that Sean's referring to. Then you need a sales team. If you've got lower value stuff, the question you've got to ask is, what type of sales intervention do I want? Do I need? You don't need a bunch of guys in suits who play golf and can do all of that. That kind of stuff. You may just need service-led people who are really good at just closing down the sale. I think it worries me greatly, and I think I might have made this point way back in 2008, Mark, when I first presented at BoS, which is that as an experiment some years ago, we rang on behalf of a client a whole bunch of people who had landed on the site, downloaded the test software, had it for more than 2 weeks, and then disappeared. And we rang them and said, why did you drop? Was the software not good enough or whatever? And most people just didn't buy it for really mundane reasons. That it fell off their radar. They just didn't get round to it. There were other things that they were busy with, etc. Now, in a situation like that, I would argue that you do need salespeople. You just don't need the top-end corporate guy. You just need someone who's friendly, service-led, and helps facilitate the last yard or so of the sale. So don't worry so much about the money value. Worry about what kind of conversation you need in order to help somebody buy. Whether it's just very light, gentle touch, or whether it's the big hitters. That's a judgment call.
Yeah, and there's clearly a price kind of judgment to make there. If people are spending 2 years making a sale into an enterprise and they're getting less than $500 a year, you've got to wonder whether they're selling the right kind of thing.
Don't read the analogy too closely. I think also for very low price software, you've got to ask yourself, having a salesperson sitting there is an expensive business. And so the price does become an issue. But then you start to have questions, well, can our service team, who we have to have there to service, can they do a little bit of selling where it's required? So it goes back to this thing of talk about the sales function rather than sales people. And the sales function can be anybody in the business. It doesn't have to be a team of telesalespeople or a team of field salespeople.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, I think there are a lot of tools that help you automate a lot of these processes as well. So when you look at things like Get Drip and all sorts of things that you can use just to kind of maintain a relationship and maintain light contact with a customer. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, even I used to run sales teams, and I mean, one of the kind of things that irritated me more than anything else was when you asked someone whether they'd been in touch with X, Y, or Z about a thing, and they said, "Yeah, I've sent them an email. They didn't respond."
Yeah.
But it's the kind of cardinal sin if you're a salesperson, and those people really aren't going to last long in any kind of sales organization. But
it's also It's also a cardinal sin for the owner, because actually, if you're paying a salesperson to sit there and manually send standard emails, then you're crazy, because you can automate all that stuff so easily. Now. You hire people to do that bit where it needs a personal touch. And so the first question is always, what type of conversation do we need to have in order to make this easy for the customer to buy?
Right. Yeah, part of the way I look at the question too is maybe the right, or the way I would ask it would be like, where in the sales process should a human be involved? You know, and you can, if you think of larger enterprise sales, it could be, very early on where they're going to be doing outbound prospecting into the Fortune 500, and then running it through the entire process. The other extreme might be somewhere, abandoned carts on the website that didn't close. Maybe we should try to email or call them and figure out why they didn't buy, to what Paul's story was talking about before. And it's a combination of kind of, where can you afford to put somebody in the sales process, a human in it, or, where does it become profitable, maybe is another way to look at it too, right? Like, at what point are you actually getting, more revenue than you're putting dollars into the equation to get that? And so the price point, obviously, to the original question, has a factor in that. I think, if you're spending, these are $1 million deals, there's clearly probably going to be people involved for a number of reasons right from the beginning. As you get smaller deals, in fact, our deal size, actually, our first initial deal for our customers, certainly in the earlier phases of our business, were actually right around $500, at least per transaction. Fortunately, in a software-based business or a media-type business like ours, the cost structure is actually pretty low. So it's, it's what percentage of that $500 do I need, can I afford to spend to, increase the number of deals that we're doing? And I think, generally speaking, almost any business is going to benefit from some level of human involvement somewhere in the process there. It's a good question, though.
Mark, may I make one more point on that? I've seen a lot of clients of mine make the mistake of overpaying the salespeople for closing deals, when actually all the hard work has been done by the marketing department. So what you have to do is almost draw a pie chart and say how much, from the very beginning, from the identifying prospect through to the closing and the support of that prospect and the growth of that prospect, how much of it is are the salespeople involved in? If they're only involved in the closing of it, then you need to set them higher targets, and they get a smaller portion of the pot. And actually, maybe you should be looking at incentivizing, commissioning, or whatever. Don't let Dan Pink hear us say that, but incentivizing the marketing teams, or radically, as one or two clients are doing now, incentivizing them all together, so that it's a more a team approach.
Yeah, very good point. So Sean just had a follow-up there, which was my comments were muffled, but those are the best sort of comments from me, frankly. What are some of the tools you referenced? The main tool I'd mentioned was GetDrip, GETDRIP. But I'm sure if someone wants to do a list of these things, we'd be more than happy to share them on the blog.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. This is Greg Law. The odds of a particular lead not closing at all are generally pretty high, whereas it's usually a reasonable assumption that a software development task will get finished. I think that's quite a contentious statement in itself, actually. What impact, if any, does this have on agile process for sales?
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. Yeah, I think, Mark, I maybe put the same, as being a software developer for many years and running a lot of software development teams, I think, certainly as an industry as a whole, many software projects do not get finished successfully or on time or as originally planned. So that might be the first sort of thing to think about in the question there. But yeah, I mean, I guess this just comes down to, I mean, there's a couple of things I would actually poke at on this. One is that, if your leads are really falling out at a very high rate, then there's sort of a different problem going on, right? And maybe we're talking about where in the qualification funnel do we start getting increased confidence in the leads. So we, there's a multi-stage selling pipeline that we, have. There's the earlier qualification stage for, any particular lead coming in. Really, stuff we find, at least when people are doing the qualification part of that right, which is probably only the first 5 or 10% of the selling process. the things that make it across that barrier into qualified lead, the probability that that deal is going to close at some point is actually extremely high at that point. I mean, that's the whole point of qualifying it, is that you think you have a deal here that's worth spending time on. And so I would say, from an agile perspective and what we're doing in the stand-ups and what goes into people's pipelines, a vast majority of the stuff is going to close. It's just a question of when. And in fact, we've actually looked at this data quite a bit, and I think we figured out, like, when you look at a lead in terms of its probability, estimated probability of closing and the close date, salespeople tend to be optimistic about the probability of it closing by a particular time, but they're actually pessimistic about the fact of whether it's actually ever going to close. So, like, to put that in terms of numbers, let's say somebody has a lead and they think it's going to 50% probability this will close by the end of the month. The reality is it's like 25% chance that it's actually going to close by the end of the month, but it's close to 100% probability that it will close eventually, if they get to that level of confidence. And what it really comes down to is they're sort of bad at guessing the timing or predicting customer behaviors, which is not all that counterintuitive. And when I look at our sales pipelines and look at performance characteristics of our reps, it's actually their ability to qualify these deals and have a sort of a rolling average consistency. In other words, like, if I'm looking at all the deals that they put above a certain probability, it's their success in actually closing those deals. It's a direct indicator of how sophisticated of a selling process they have. And so people that sort of, in other words, are claiming to have high probabilities of closing on deals that don't close, that's like the very first red flag about some sort of selling skills that need improvement there.
Absolutely. I think also, because Greg's question is a good one, but I think the things we're comparing, we need to take a look at that, because actually you're not comparing making a sale against delivering a product. I think the best way to look at it is looking at it as a weekly or a monthly sales target is the aim, in the same way that as you would have a weekly or a monthly sprint. And in sales, there's a certain amount of fallout for that target, and part of the agile process is working out what that fallout is. In the same way that during a sprint you have to build some stuff to decide whether you keep it or discard it. Not every piece of code you write goes into the finished product. It's the same. It's exactly the same in sales. So the analogy I would make is compare the monthly sprints against the monthly targets. And in reality, that's what often happens in software companies, because when you do your end of month beer and pizza, review, that's what we say. We say the software team have done this. This was the result of their sprint. This is what they aimed to do. This is how far they got. And we do exactly the same thing with the sales team. So I think that's probably a better comparison to make.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. I fully agree with that. Right? It's looking at that in aggregate is what you're really measuring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anyone? So you have monthly targets for your teams, is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, we work on a monthly forecasting cycle with weekly sprints. So we divide it up into the four chunks and it's a calendar month in that case. Yeah.
Because everyone seems to use calendar months, and everybody then uses quarterly targets. And the kind of classic thing, if you're going to buy something like enterprise software from Oracle, is you'd never make your decision until the last day of the quarter, because that's the day you'll get the biggest discount, because everyone's really keen to make target, and they'll slash the prices. Redgate has a different approach, and I'm sitting in the Redgate offices here. They don't pay salespeople commission, and what they've found is that means that they have a very different set of people who are salespeople, but they don't have those big discounts and those big deals being done at the end of a month. If you're buying software, you know that people are more inclined to push a deal over the edge at the end of the month. Has anyone ever looked at doing monthly reporting but doing it in the middle of the month?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess, this whole thing, right, for me, I guess, like the quarterly discounts, I know, it's funny too, we kind of all know which vendors are susceptible to this, right? If it's Salesforce.com and I'm renegotiating my contract, I'm waiting for the end of their fiscal year or the end of their fiscal quarter. They're extremely sensitive to that, and it's amazing how much they're willing to give up to make that happen. That doesn't seem really efficient to me. Dell's the same way. You want to buy a Dell computer? Oh my gosh, wait till the end of the quarter or the month. Call your Dell rep, and there's a completely different story. We specifically avoid doing all of that stuff. So we do, we're on a monthly forecasting cycle. We have very structured pricing. The discounting is strictly based on volume characteristics and things like that. There's really no timing sensitivity at all. I would much rather get a deal 3 weeks later for 10-15% more than to get it today. And so I don't know if I'm exactly answering your question there, Mark, but I guess maybe the same thing Redgate's doing, that structured pricing. I think these problems I see of making it bursty and having customers wait is kind of self-induced based on, I would call it, a lack of discipline in pricing around the products.
Yeah, I mean, for public companies, it's as much about stuffing as much revenue into a quarter as you can. And if you're Salesforce, you've got two mechanisms to do that. You can buy another company with stock, and
Right.
that's another story.
I can give you two examples of companies that have changed their reporting and done it mid-month or mid-quarter, and kept that internal, and they both abandoned it once they'd IPO'd and had the city breathing down their neck for quarterly results. So this is, I think Jeff is absolutely right. This is not I don't think it's even a question of the commission to pay commission or not. That's a whole other debate. I think this is about price discipline, rate discipline, and I think it's about the sense of value that the salespeople have in the product, which is a training and a cultural issue. If you address those, then the commission or no commission is another matter that it depends on your culture. But the particular issue you talk about are actually all externally driven.
Yeah, I mean, I actually see another parallel to software development here for slightly different reasons, but anything that's causing burstiness in there and incentive is really working against you from a process discipline standpoint. You really want to be smooth and steady. It's not exactly tortoise versus hare, but you want to be the consistent, the consistently fast rabbit, ideally in the pipeline, or at least consistent. And in fact, we always, and I talk about this on, with the sales team all the time, is that I much rather have predictability than faster growth, actually, to a large extent, because I think predictability builds the foundation that gives you faster growth. And in fact, we take it to the extreme. So like what's going on with the public companies, right? That just means they're bad at predicting revenue, and when they feel like they got to force it to put to push hard to get to a number they didn't make, that just means they didn't have process discipline in the first place that made it predictable. And so yeah, I think, and again, we take it to the extreme, which is that we actually do not have, hard deadlines or targets for any of the salespeople on the team. This is really about you writing down the number that you believe you can commit to, and how much money do you want to make, how successful do you want to be. And obviously we keep an eye on profitability on an individual person by person basis, but at the same time there isn't anybody that comes in this company and we says, well, here's the number you got to make coming in month 2, month 3, month 4. We've just seen there's many different formulas to success there, different ramping profiles, and to some extent just different talent levels and level of effort that people are also going to put in. And again, what we're looking for, the commitment to the team is always predictability of your forecast and the number that you put up, not necessarily hitting some arbitrary number that I make up.
I might make one defense of the quarterly or monthly target, the hard deadline. I'm not sure I really believe this myself, but I can almost imagine half a dozen of my clients screaming at me now on the Hangout, which is one thing that a hard deadline does. And developers will know this when they have their coding camps and stuff like that, is that when there's a hard deadline, it pushes you to do things that you wouldn't normally do, to call people back who you wouldn't normally call back, to think of new angles that you might take, think of new markets, and in the same way, in a really good brainstorm, it's the fixed time limit that pushes you to stretch your thinking. There is an argument amongst many sales managers who would make it passionately that it's in the last 2 days of the quarter that they close deals with clients they'd never heard of before because they were desperate and they rang somebody and just found a great deal, or that they find new and better ways of selling or new arguments. And I think there's some value in that, but I think you can generate that in other ways too.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, that it's sort of like the death marches in software development. You can, if you got a trade show coming up and you got to do the demo, okay, well, there's a hard deadline and we need to do that, and there's just, there's no way around it. But generally speaking, that's going to be a very inefficient. There's probably crappy code being generated, or in the case of sales, sort of bad customer deals or bad pricing or something's going wrong in there when you really start to push too hard. I'm always looking to think about it as maximizing long-term efficiency, which really comes down to smoothness and reproducibility there.
And there's one final real downside, which is why I worry a lot about hard deadlines, which is if you hire salespeople who are smart, commercially focused, money-driven to some degree, if you're doing it that way, then if you get close to a quarter and you've got no chance of hitting your goal, you just stop calling people till the next quarter. You might as well have the deals come in next quarter. And I've seen whole sales teams give up in the past, which on one level you might judge them harshly for doing that, and the other level they're only actually behaving in a way that you've employed them to behave. So you have to be careful. People will game systems as well, and that's largely why I dislike the hard deadline.
It was much easier to do when sales were done on signed orders and this, that, and the other, because you could literally just stick them in your bottom drawer and wait until the next month. Whereas...
And these days when you have telephone systems that correspond with your Salesforce or whichever CRM system you're using, it's a lot harder to pretend that you've called the client. But I'll give you one quick story. I know of one client, former client of mine, where the salespeople admitted that what they would do is they knew when to call particular prospects who they didn't want to speak to at that time. They knew when they were out, whatever, and they would just leave them really long messages on their voicemail so that it registered as a call. So I think if you hire smart people, don't think that you can corral them like pack animals. They usually will find a way to game the system. Because they don't do it. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I just think if you treat salespeople like that, or if you treat them with sort of Victorian factory methods of controlling their output, they will respond in that way. I seem to remember they called it Theory X, Theory Y many years ago. But people will behave in a grown-up way if you treat them as grown-ups. And I think that's what Jeff's point was really all about.
Yeah, it's a very good point from Sean Anderson on that. Dharmesh mentioned at a previous BoS that end of the month sales often led to unhappy customers. They discovered that their salespeople were getting too aggressive, and at the end of the month were closing customers who hadn't really been qualified. So, I think there are a ton of things around this. Given salespeople have a reputation for being not brilliant sales managers. The best salespeople are often not the best sales managers. Do you think there's an argument to make good software developers or good team managers in software teams, put them in charge of the sales team, or are they just too damn expensive?
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, there's an example sitting right here.
Somehow, CTO, VP of Engineering inherited building a sales team, but that's interesting. The first thing I was going to say when you're starting to ask that was that, clearly I see the same parallel in software development relative to, the promotion of a good developer into a software manager is not necessarily a successful recipe, no differently than that. I think, there's some overlap, and I think probably we're sort of promoting a dev lead over to become a sales manager, where that's going to fail is that part of it's going to be in sort of commanding the respect of the team. If you you really need to understand what that person's actually doing, and I think having carried a bag or been on a phone to be a frontline sales manager is probably a pretty important property to have or experience to be able to draw on, even though that the skills that you're going to be applying and how you're going to be working with the people on the team is obviously not selling them in quite the same way. There's a whole different set of things that come into play there. I would think that I wouldn't, certainly off the top of my head, I can't think of a good reason that you could automatically assume that one should translate to the other. The one place that would be interesting, and it might become maybe more mid-level salesman kind of thing, or maybe this sort of some justification for how I ended up with a job like this, that if you start thinking another layer or two up, I think understanding the management similarities of the overall organization is really important. And I think that does, for the whole premise of my talk originally, I think all of that carries over very directly, and is probably much more directly useful, especially if you're willing to, spend some time and read some sales books and really understand what's going on at the, face-to-face level between them and customers. I don't know. I'm really interested to see what Paul has to say on this one. I feel like this is more of a Paul question than a Jeff question here.
I always say when we recruit sales managers, that you take a fresh look. It's very easy to put your top salesperson into the role because you know them, you know they're committed to the product, you know they understand it, all those things. Your very top salespeople are often just too selfish is the wrong word. They're outwardly focused. They're focused on the customer, the territory, and making the money, if you like. They also are often the people who are naturally good at it, which sometimes means that they are not great at explaining why or how to people who might be struggling. So what I tend to look for is I switch the taxonomy, if you like. Rather than hiring the best salesperson, what I do is the first thing I look for is somebody who's smart enough to read the market. So somebody who's able to work out the best place to put the salespeople's effort at any one time in the month. Then I want somebody who has a clinical understanding of the sales process, by which I mean they can sit and listen to sales calls and they can hear the point at which the customer is either engaged or disengaging, and they know what can be said in order to turn it around, so that they can give very clear, very precise feedback. I think the third thing I look for is having people who care enough about motivating their staff and understand how to motivate staff and develop staff. So I think you have to be a good coach, and you have to worry about things like team dynamics and all of that sort of stuff. And so often the very best sales managers were usually those who were not the best salespeople. They had to struggle to learn how to do it, because then they have some empathy with anybody else who is. And then I look for people who can sell. That's the kind of bottom of the rung. And I don't expect salespeople to do a lot of sales managers to do a lot of selling. But I think what is important is that from time to time, they are the ones who go out there and they pull in the big deal that nobody else can get, or they can go back to a customer where there was a real problem and they've got the authority to do it. So the salespeople, or they can join the troops when we've got a really big target or a really big sales campaign on, and just lead occasionally from the front. And I think those four things in that order are what I look for. And so regardless of whether it's someone who's come up through the sales ranks or someone who's come from elsewhere, though I would always recruit against those four criteria.
It's a good list, yeah.
Great. Slight different, or slight change of tack, and Sean, I'll answer the, or actually this Redgate question Sean's brought up. I don't know if you can see that on the screen. Let me click it there. You mentioned Redgate doesn't hire traditional salespeople because they're not on commission. What type did they go for? Did they find technical people, customers of their DB software that started selling, or a different type? No, I shouldn't really answer for them, but I would say, I mean, and Paul, you can jump in here. I would say that they have recruited salespeople. I think the kind of dial for dollars slot machine salespeople don't fit into an environment, particularly where the commission thing isn't such a or it's not an element of the package at all. So typically, I would say the salespeople are more team-oriented in the first place. But most of the salespeople I've seen in Redgate who've been there and been successful have actually kind of come in and been trained up and gone through the ranks.
Well, I, as you know, I've done a wee bit of work with the Redgate team, and I would say on one level, they are salespeople. They do all the good sales stuff that, when they're at their best. They do a lot of the good sales stuff that you would expect any salesperson to do. They make first contact when somebody's made a download. They try and work out what the problem is, and they try and do great demos and all the stuff that you would expect salespeople to do. I think actually this is more of a function of Redgate making a smart move based on who their customer is. Their customer are developers. and therefore they expect different things. If you have a piece of software that is designed for real estate agents, or for insurance salespeople, or for people who are much more salesy, if you like, I think you would hire a slightly more upfront salesperson who will push a bit harder, because their customers would expect it. They'll sort of judge your level of belief based on that. Whereas Redgate hire people who can pick up the technology pretty quickly, who understand developers, and they spend a lot of time coaxing them into understanding the market. So don't think about, is it commission, is it not, all of those things. Is that, are they right for our customer base? You do a hard sell to a Redgate customer, and they just won't call you back. They probably won't put the phone down on you, because from the calls I've heard, they're also nice, but the customers, but they won't buy anymore, and they won't call you back, or they'll block your call. I think the reason Redgate have a good reputation in the market is because they know how to talk to developers, and I don't think that's got anything to do with their commission or whatever. I think they just know how to talk to developers.
Yeah, I also think they have a much more agile. I mean, there's a much more sort of agile approach to what they're doing than most of the sales environments I've seen. Just going to kind of chuck in a couple of comments here. One from Dimitar again. Agile sales is very different to traditional sales management. The long and short of it is the aim of introducing agile in sales is to end up with a self-organized and self-managed team, which is a great point.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, and maybe to add to that, it's really intended to, it's trying to prevent that really competitive. You want healthy competition amongst the team, but you don't want the dog eat dog kind of competition in there. And really the stand-ups and the way that the shared and collaborative effort of a team, and this probably actually segue into the other question a bit, in terms of the individuals on the team thinking of not only their own goal but the team's goal, and each person on the team being successful in reaching that goal. And I think the agile and the stand-up process and the way the team drives to not only their own burn down but the collective burn down of the team in the office and the company are all things that are sort of part of those underlying motivations and incentives to, in a team effort sense of achieving the goals as a common objective, essentially.
Mm. Anything to add, Paul, or should we?
Well, I think this does segue nicely into Greg's next question.
Yeah. So this is commenting on shared and team-based incentives, commission versus individual, or a combination of the two. Does shared commission put off the top salespeople?
Paul's probably more qualified to answer that part of it. The one thing I was going to volunteer here certainly is that at Stack Overflow, certainly at the individual contributor level, the only thing that affects their commission is their direct efforts. We try to, we think of it, and this is one of the reasons we use Agile, I think, to Dimitar's comment, it's this self-management and team collaborative aspect that we try to enforce through the process and the culture and the way that people are interacting, and we think that's enough. The roll-ups of that towards the collaborative goals of the office is really the way that you get alignment and buy-in across the team. It's the fact that if you're not driving to your forecast or not meeting your forecast, you're letting the team down no differently than if you drop the football in sports or something like that. And I think that's the way we're really doing it. And this actually does interestingly tie into the whole sort of compensation thing and even commission versus no commission. I find what Redgate's done. I think Joel's other company, Fog Creek, they experimented with it. I'm not sure if they're still doing it. Which is eliminating commissions altogether with the salespeople. Everything based on the research and psychology behind motivating people pretty much tells us that you shouldn't have to commission people, or maybe you don't even want to commission people. That maybe the parallel to software development would be that more productive software developers, while they maybe get promoted or have more senior positions, we're not commissioning people to write lines of code or anything like that. And so you do ask yourself, why would you need to commission people at all? My theory on this has actually been an interesting one. I would really, like I said, a lot of me really wants to actually eliminate commission programs altogether and go to a fixed compensation. But I think the one thing that, and this gets into the team collaboration aspect of it, that's the monkey wrench of eliminating commissions, gets into this fairness question that this Greg's questions is trying to get at, which is, if you're a high performer on the team and selling more than somebody next to you, the very fact that it's so easy to very deterministically measure the performance of salespeople, i.e., how much revenue they generated, if you don't have differences in compensation based on that very visible performance thing, I think it always leads to dissent within the team. It's not fair at some level. If you're sitting next to somebody and they make exactly what you make, and they're selling half as much as you or twice as much as you, I think fairness, even 10% difference, right? Fairness questions immediately come into play. In software development, for example, I think there's some sense of who's better in the team, more senior, perhaps getting paid more, but they don't know exactly what people are making and what the commission's going to be, and they also, it's a lot harder to measure the true output. Like, two good software developers on the team seem to be pretty much equivalent from a measurement standpoint, so the fairness criteria don't quite come up in the same kind of way. So anyway, that's sort of my theory behind all of this and kind of how to think about the various facets of the problem.
I concur. I think for me, this goes back to my first comment, which is how much of the whole sales process is somebody responsible for. If you've got the enterprise sales guy who has to identify the product, and that spends a lot of time researching the market and working out who's who, and then kicks down the door, builds the relationship, builds a business case, does a formal pitch in response for a proposal or whatever, and follows it through for an 18-month sort of thing, then actually I don't think anything other than individual commission works. And for that level of stuff, although the psychology says one thing, I just never run into salespeople who go, yeah, get rid of it. I'm happy if you give me 50% more money and I'll stick with it. I've never met anybody who said, yes, I'm happy with that. So I have a certain amount of dissonance between the psychology and the reality of what people say. If, however, you're towards the other end of the spectrum, where actually a big amount of the hard bit of sales, what I call the hard bit of sales, the finding the contacts, making first contact, warming up the lead, all of that sort of stuff. If that is done by marketing or by automation or by customer services, those things, and you have a bunch of salespeople who are essentially waiting for a lead to come and for the phone to ring, and then what you end up with is, and you have individual commission, what you end up with is the person who answers the phone most often is the person who makes the most money, or the person who has the best territory is the person who makes the most money, and that is inherently unfair, and it causes all sorts of problems in teams. So the more that you have what I call a service-led sell, where the initial contact is made by other people and through marketing, etc., the more I think there's an argument for a team approach. So that means that when everybody's on the phone, somebody's still got an incentive to pick up the phone, and make a call for somebody else, or to cover calls for each other, or to cover lunch times, or to cover holidays. All of those things, you need a group commission for that end. If you want somebody to go and blaze a trail for you and be an absolute advocate of your product in the very early stages of a major product, you probably need to give them a hefty personal financial incentive. And then there are 100 shades of grey, which it would take me, sorry Greg, it would take me too long to go through, but I'm happy to address at another time, or maybe on a blog or something like that.
Cool. Well, this is probably a good time to select this question from Sean. Thank you, Mark, Paul, and Jeff. This has been very informative hangout. It's very timely for our company. Sean's been coming to business software since he was.
He's the one guy who's been coming longer than I have. So.
Yes. And I know he's found a lot of success in the last couple of years, which is always just fantastic to see. So you guys rock. See you at BoS 2015. Well, do you know what? You will, because Jeff, you're talking in Boston this year. Tell us what you're talking about.
Did we figure that out yet exactly? I think
we were getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, so this will be, you might have to squint a little to where we end up with the final thing. But I think one of the really interesting things about doing the presentation last year with this developer guide, the sales, it was pretty interesting the way the audience split out. About half of the people that I got feedback and talked to about the different ideas were very much trying to understand the parallels between software development and sales and exactly how we applied it. And there's been some great conversations that have come out of that. But the interesting thing was the other half of the conversations were people that were technical people that were just actually, they're like, well, wait, talk to me more just about how you stabilize software development in the first place. In other words, part of my premise was, taking a stable, scaling software team and building that out, and applying that sort of thinking and logic around the management structures over to sales. Found a lot of people that just wanted to talk more about it strictly in the context of software development and doing that. So the talk this year at BoS is going to be essentially the developer's guide to building development teams, I guess, or something like that. We'll probably get into a couple different areas of that around scaling out the organization, looking at it from technical debt. When do you pay that down? The trade-offs between the long-term and the short-term things from a project management perspective, but also on the people management side of it, I think.
Fantastic. And Mr. Kenny.
Fingers crossed. Is Paul talking?
Well, this is Mark's way of putting me on the spot. I'll
pile on to that.
Already indicated that I would love to speak. I can't do. I don't think I can do Europe this year. But
I'm not inviting you to, Paul.
Yeah, but I think I can do Boston. I'm very tempted to talk about the whole issue of motivating yourself and others to make the sales calls, and which will address some of the incentive stuff, but it will address a whole range of other stuff as well, which I think is equally important. I'm currently doing a piece of work which I can't talk about for a client, bit of research work, and if it throws up something interesting, I will definitely do that topic. If not, I've got a few other ideas which are too numerous to mention just now. We haven't got time for me to go through them all now, but I'm aiming for that topic.
Fantastic. And just to remind you, BoS Europe is 24th, 25th of June, and that's in Cambridge. We've got some fantastic speakers. We're just starting to announce them. So we've got Jenny Jepson, who's an agile coach and talks about neuroscience and how people's brains work and how that then feeds into motivating and building high-performance teams. We've got Des Traynor, who's talking about what he's learned in building Intercom over the last few years. He did a great talk in the US last year. Jack Lang, who's the founder or one of the co-founders of Raspberry Pi. I've known Jack for a long time. I invited him to a dinner about 5 years ago, and it was a dinner sponsored by some lawyers that wanted to meet rich, important, useful business people in Cambridge. And he introduced himself and said, "I'm Jack Lang. I'm inventing and building a fully working computer that's going to cost $25. And the lawyer phoned me up the day after and said, "What on earth did you put us in a room with that guy for? He's completely mad." Raspberry Pi's third birthday party was last weekend, and they've sold 5 million of those Raspberry Pis in 3 years. It's quite an interesting, a fascinating open source project. And we've got some more people that we won't announce today, but it's always great to drop in that Jeff and Paul will be joining us in Boston as well. So, guys, really appreciate your time, your input. Thank you very much indeed to everybody that's watching. If you haven't, go and buy Kathy's book.
It's awesome.
It is awesome.
It is
it's badass.
It's badass. Right?
Yeah.
It's badass. And if you've got any questions about Kathy's book, and here's another little exclusive, she's going to come and do a hangout with us and answer the questions. But she would like to know what the questions are before we do that. So I would encourage you to let us know any things that you want to know, because she is really keen that people want to do it. And as you know, she's not doing any kind of online promotion for it, so go and tell other people about it, because it is a brilliant piece of work.
Yeah.
We'll see you in Boston, if not before, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
We should do music now. Da, 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 da.